The rise of Avery Collins. Avery Collins, the founder and CEO of Ascendant Technologies, stepped onto her flight from Dallas to Seattle, clutching her first-class boarding pass. The window seat was more than just a place on an airplane for her. It symbolized years of sleepless nights spent coding, pitching, and bootstrapping her startup into a multi-million-dollar business. She had earned it, and she had paid for it. But when she reached row 2, a middle-aged man with a sleek haircut and an expensive suit was already sprawled across it. His loafers were propped up on the seat, and his arm was draped over the armrest as though he owned the entire plane. Avery's eyes flicked to the seat number. "Excuse me," she said, her tone calm, but with a sharp edge. "That's my seat." The man didn't even look up from his phone. He smirked. "Not anymore," he replied, barely acknowledging her presence. "They upgraded me. First-class perks. You've been bumped." His name tag read Mitchell Rivers. Avery recognized him immediately from the Headlanesa corporate consultant with connections to some of the biggest equity firms in the country. Before she could respond, a blonde flight attendant, whose name tag gleamed on her uniform, appeared at her side. "Ma'am," the attendant said, her expression pinched, "there's been a system error. You've been reassigned to seat 27D in economy." Avery stared at her boarding pass in disbelief. The numbers didn't match the one she had scanned at the gate. Someone had switched her ticket. She could feel the injustice like a cold sting in her chest. "Check your system," Avery said, her voice tight. "I paid for this seat." The flight attendant shrugged. "Frequent flyers get priority," she replied nonchalantly. Mitchell finally looked up, his pale gray eyes gleaming with triumph. "Better luck next time," he said, flicking a VIP Platinum card in front of her face as if that settled the matter. Avery took a deep breath, her instincts screaming to fight back. But years of navigating boardrooms had taught her the importance of control. She lifted her phone, tapped record, and aimed it at Mitchell. Then she panned it toward the flight attendant. "We'll let the internet decide," Avery said, her voice steady but firm. The flight attendant's cheeks flushed, and Mitchell's smirk faltered. The tension in the cabin thickened as whispers started to spread. Avery's livestream counter ticked up 50 viewers, then 100. "I paid $1,600 for this seat," Avery said into her phone, keeping her eyes on Mitchell. "And this man thinks he's entitled to steal it." By now, all eyes in the cabin were on her. A woman in seat 3C leaned over to her teenage son, whispering. An older gentleman in 1D shook his head in disbelief. Avery stood her ground, her camera still pointed at Mitchell and the attendant. The woman behind her spoke up. "That's not right," she said loudly, looking around for support. "Yeah," her son agreed, clearly uncomfortable. An old man in seat WD muttered, "You can't just do that." Finally, Paul Decker, the flight manager, arrived, his broad frame clad in a navy blazer. He exuded authority, the kind that suggested zero tolerance and no room for negotiation. "What's the issue here?" Paul barked, his eyes scanning the scene before fixing on Avery. "My seat was stolen," Avery replied calmly. "And your crew is complicit," she added, her gaze unwavering. Paul's jaw clenched. "Stop recording. Sit down, or we'll remove you from the flight." The threat was clear, but Avery wasn't backing down. She had faced worse venture capitalists who underestimated her, landlords who tried to overcharge, and investors who assumed a woman like her didn't belong in tech. "Remove me for what?" Avery raised her voice slightly, allowing the tension to build. "For claiming what I paid for." Her live stream hit 500 viewers, then 1,000. Comments poured in, "Stay strong, expose them." Mitchell, arms crossed, looked at her with a bored expression, as if she were a minor inconvenience. The flight attendant, now visibly nervous, shuffled back down the aisle. "Ma'am," she called, her voice strained, "please take your assigned seat. You're disrupting the flight." "I've done nothing wrong," Avery replied, her tone cold. Her camera stayed trained on the attendant's rigid face and Mitchell's smug posture. Minutes later, Paul called for reinforcement security. But Avery wasn't backing down. "You don't get to rewrite the facts because they make you uncomfortable," she said, her voice clear and strong. The livestream count surged to 2,000. The plane hit turbulence, but Avery stood firm, unyielding in the face of the chaos. Paul's phone buzzed, and as he glanced at the screen, his face hardened. Handle the troublemaker quietly, he muttered under his breath. A cold chill ran down Avery's spine. This wasn't random. Something wasn't right. The battle intensifies. The tension in the cabin grew as the situation escalated. The whispers turned into murmurs, and the murmurs grew into hushed conversations as passengers exchanged looks and opinions. Avery remained unfazed, her phone camera still rolling. Paul barked orders to Lisa, the flight attendant, to get the captain. The urgency in his voice sent a shiver down Avery's spine. She knew this wasn't just about a seat Anna Maria, it was about something much bigger. It wasn't just about her standing up for her rights. No, this was a power struggle, and she was determined not to back down. Minutes later, the door to the cockpit opened, and in stepped Captain John Mathers. He was in his late 50s, wiry and grim. His sharp eyes flicked over the scene as he took in the situation. "What's going on here?" Captain Mathers asked, his voice low but commanding. Paul spoke first, his words dripping with authority. "She's disrupting the flight, refusing to follow instructions." He pointed to Avery, but his accusation was hollow. He knew what she had done nothing wrong. Avery raised her phone to the captain, speaking directly into the camera. "I've done nothing wrong," she said calmly, but with undeniable force. "I paid for this seat, and I'm being kicked out for it." Captain Mathers scanned her with the practiced indifference of someone who had seen it all. He didn't blink. "Sit in 27D or we land this plane," he ordered, his voice flat. Avery's live stream had already hit 2,000 viewers, the numbers climbing steadily. The comments flooded and people were rallying behind her, cheering her on. "Fight for what you paid for," one comment read. "You've got this, don't give up," another one echoed. Avery's heart raced, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm not going anywhere," she said to the camera, her eyes still locked on the captain. "I paid for this seat, and no one gets to take it from me." The cabin grew even more tense as whispers turned into full conversations. There was an energy in the air now, a collective understanding that what was happening wasn't just about a seat. It was about standing up to power, to privilege, and to those who assumed they could simply walk over others. Mitchell's smug grin widened as he leaned back, watching it all unfold like it was some sort of game. But he wasn't prepared for what happened next. "You've made your decision," Avery said, her voice louder now, steady with determination. "But I'll make sure the world knows what's happening here." As her live stream reached 5,000 viewers, a soft voice from the back of the plane spoke up. "This isn't right," said the older woman from 1A. She stood and pointed at Mitchell. "I saw the whole thing. She's telling the truth." Avery didn't let up, her camera still recording. "Thank you," she said, her voice sincere, her gaze never leaving Mitchell's. "People are watching." The live stream surged to 10,000 viewers, then 20,000. She wasn't just broadcasting her fight anymore. She was leading a movement. Paul, clearly out of options, leaned closer to Lisa. "Prepare for an emergency landing," he muttered. "Emergency landing?" Avery repeated, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Is this really necessary?" The murmurs in the cabin grew louder. A woman in 3C whispered to her teenage son, "This is ridiculous, right?" "Yeah," her son agreed, nodding. "This is so wrong." Avery stood tall, unflinching. The more they tried to intimidate her, the stronger she became. She wasn't just fighting for her seat anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had been marginalized, for everyone who had been silenced. The live stream climbed higher and higher, the numbers now breaking the 30,000 mark. The comments flowed in faster than she could keep up with. "I can't believe they're doing this," one comment read. "She's standing up for all of us," another one said. But then, a cold voice interrupted. "Last chance," Paul growled, leaning in close. "Sit down, or we'll remove you." Avery knew what that meant, an excuse to remove her from the plane, to punish her for daring to stand up for herself. But she wasn't going to let them. "Remove me for what?" Avery said, her voice cutting through the tension. "For standing up for what's mine?" The live stream reached 50,000 viewers. The comments came in faster than ever. "You're a hero," one user commented. "This is epic," another wrote. Avery's heart pounded, but she stood her ground. She wasn't going anywhere. Then, without warning, the plane dipped slightly, as if the captain was trying to add to the drama. The turbulence rattled the cabin, but Avery didn't budge. Her phone was still recording, and the audience was captivated. But just as the plane steadied, Paul's phone buzzed. He glanced down at it, his face hardening. "Handle the situation quietly," he muttered into the phone. Avery caught the cold shift in his demeanor. She knew something was wrong. This wasn't just about the seed anymore. It was about silencing her. Avery's confrontation with the authorities. The plane touched down in Boise, Idaho, not by coincidence, but by design. As soon as the doors opened, 2 police officers were waiting on the tarmac. Avery stepped off the plane, flanked by the officers. She could feel Mitchell's eyes on her as she walked past him, his grin wide and malicious, like he'd already won. Inside the terminal, the flight attendants refused to meet her gaze. Paul, however, didn't look away. His smirk was almost mocking, but Avery wasn't fazed. She knew this wasn't over. She was marched into a glass-walled security office, where she was confronted by Officer Barnes, the one with the buzz cut. "This is a setup," Avery said, holding out her phone. "I have proof." Officer Barnes slapped the phone out of her hand. It skittered across the table, the screen cracking on impact. "Put your phone away," he ordered. "You're being booked for disruptive conduct," Officer Ruiz said. His voice was cold, and his tone made it clear he was only doing his job. "For what?" Avery asked, still calm despite the growing anger in her chest. A voice from behind her spoke. "She assaulted a passenger," Paul said, his voice accusing. "Provoked the crew." Avery's breath caught in her throat as she turned to face Paul. The truth was clear, but no one was listening. Clara, the older woman from 1A, shouted from inside the terminal. "That's not true. I saw everything." But Paul ignored her, and the handcuffs clicked tightly around Avery's wrists. The cold metal was a harsh reminder of the battle she was in. She was being humiliated in public, dragged into a holding cell, but Avery wasn't going to let it break her. She had fought too long and too hard for everything she had.